Welcome,
Laten we die
everyone.
november was zo.
Buongiorno. And my name is Janneke van der Weijden, and I am your host on this session, Going to Italy. My own experience traveling in Italy is mainly from the time before I had ever heard of Anne Lister. Aged about 14, we went on a camping trip in Tuscany, for example, and I've been to Rome and to Sicily before. And obviously, there was a time in the summer of 2019 when I did my first transcriptions of Anne's journals from the transcription project whilst camping halfway up a mountain with a view of Lake Garda. Unfortunately, when I visited Verona and Sirmione that summer, I had no idea of Anne's presence there 180 years or so earlier, which is very different from the three panelists that we have with us today. Born and bred in Italy, they've done their share of traveling and especially researching everything to do with Anne's fascination with Italy. And they've also delved further into the people that Anne met along the way. So in the next 45 minutes or so, you will be taken along some of the exciting discoveries that they have made over the past almost 3 years. Now, for those of you who are not quite sure what Anne Lister is, it is the first Anne Lister Italia it's the first Italian website dedicated to Anne Lister. On it, you will find everything you will want to know about her. Her diaries, her travels, her exploits, her passions, her loves. The website is partially bilingual, so even if you don't speak Italian, you can just enjoy it just as much. Anne Lister Italia is a research project, and there's still a lot to discover about Anne, and this site is an active window on her world in Italy. Let me introduce the panel to you. We have Lucia Falzari, a copywriter and the creator and curator of the website. Her passion for complex characters made her happily and inevitably capitulate to Anne Lister. She divides her time between historical research on Anne and Anne's related Italian connections and the development of new projects for Anne Lister Italia, as well as traveling in Anne's footsteps throughout Italy and beyond, as you might have seen in the travel session earlier. Francesca Raia is a researcher and codebreaker. She is the curator of Anne Lister Italia's research projects and the transcriber of both the diaries of Anne Lister and Anne Walker, and all of the historical documentation resulting from the new archive findings. You can find her transcripts of Anne's journals on Tumblr. Irene Trotta is a graphic and data visualization designer. She is responsible for the designs and graphic designs of Anne Lister Italia in all its forms. Irene is obsessed with data, with diaries, Anne Lister, codes, 19th century fashion and etiquette. And she also volunteered in the West Yorkshire Archives transcription project of Anne Lister's diaries. Before the three panelists will take it in turn to share their findings with us, I would like to mention that, as always, you're very welcome to post any questions that may come up during the presentation in the Zoom chat. And we will close the session with a Q&A, so we will get back to those. But now, without further ado, let me hand over to Francesca.
So, thank you, Janneke, for the fantastic introduction, and welcome everybody to our Going to Italy session. So, Anne Lister traveled to Italy in 1827 with Maria Barlow and their daughter Jane. Their journey lasted about 30 days and covered a good deal of the northeastern country. Basically, what was then the Regno Lombardo-Veneto, the Lombardo-Venetian kingdom. They entered the country through the Splugen Pass and visited all the main cities like Trent, Verona, Padua, Mantova, Como, and of course, Venice and Milan. We must point out that at the time, Italy wasn't united yet. Venice and Milan are the two Italian cities where Anne stopped the longest, 5 days each, and they were former capitals of the two recently united territories, although Milan was now, in 1827, the official seat of the viceroy. Both cities fascinated Anne for different reasons.
Thank you. Now, Venice was already a romantic icon in 1827, one of the highlights of the Grand Tour that saw Italy as a key destination in the 19th century. by 1827, the city was clearly still bearing the signs of the past powers of the Repubblica Serenissima, formally ended in 1797, and its decadence was still inspiring painters and poets like Lord Byron, gathering here from everywhere. Anne herself described the town as the fallen mistress of commerce of the world, and remarked that the town was extremely silent and no anything like all the other cities that one sees. Despite the great heat and humidity, it was the end of July, and explored it all, visiting the same highlights we'd basically visit today, the lions, as she would say, and the symbol of Venice is a lion. She went from the Arsenale to the two basilicas of San Giorgio Maggiore on the island and St. Mark's. So, except for really very few details, most of what she saw and wrote about is still there today. And her travel journals here can be trusted nearly as much as a newly printed guidebook. Even the Hotel Europa, where she stayed with Maria Barlow, is still there, not far from St. Mark's Square, is the St. Regis of today. But of course, so is also Rialto Bridge, which Anne passed multiple times over and under, always on the gondola she hired, which she found very comfortable ever since she first stepped on it. The greatest difference sits in how she saw the town. In fact, she had to hire a gondola to move from one place to the other, since the main entrances to the buildings in 1827 were on the waterways, the canals, while today we mostly walk in what then were the servants' alleys, the so-called calli. And then here's to Irene.
Thank you. So Milan is another keynote of Anne's journey in Italy. We're now used to think of Rome as a capital, but at the time it was Milan, the current capital. We had an Anne Lister Italia meet in Anne's footsteps early this year. And the exciting thing is in these pages of Anne's journal is that she was witnessing a town clearly showing the still ongoing transition of powers in the country. We have an example of this in what Anne calls the Arc du Simplon, the Simplon Gate. Although in Milan's dialect this is still called Arc del Sempion, today it's known as Arco della Pace, the Arch of Peace. Napoleon had started the construction of this monumental gate, and after his fall, it was abandoned. The works were resumed only the year before Anne's visit, but the arch would now be named after the current Austrian Emperor Francois I, as she duly notes in her travel journal when describing it in detail. Another monumental work in progress was the new cathedral. The Duomo was under construction, and this is again what we read in Anne's travel journal, as she describes the pavement only completed in the central nave, noting the nearly 5,000 statues, and obviously comparing this cathedral to York's Minster, which spoiled her for Gothic. Anne also went to see the Lazzaretto, a quadrangular construction with rooms facing a long portico destined to host and treat the plague sick. Anne described and measured it. Of the square of arcades, the south side, 454 of my paces by 4 broad, or 3 2/3 umbrella broad. But today only a little church and a small part of 5 rooms facing under the portico survive, belonging to the Orthodox community. Being interested in arts, Anne also visited the Brera Gallery, where she found the Marriage of the Virgin by Raphael to be her favorite picture of all she had ever seen. The gallery is still today pretty the same, and even many paintings like Agar and Abraham by Guercino next to St. Peter and Paul by Guido Reni are placed more or less in the same spots where she described them.
Despite being around the country for so long, Anne never managed to reach Florence, Rome, or Naples. But Anne Lister Italia has found documents connecting her world to some of these places all the same.
Yeah, exactly. Her world and her friends. Sorry, am I muted? No. Yeah, sorry, I have some technical issues now. I was saying, we talked about Anne Lister's 1827 Italian days with Mrs. Barlow and her daughter Jane. Well, In late 1829, so about 2 years after their journey with Anne, Maria Barlow and Jane returned to Italy and settled in Florence, in the Grand Duchy of Tuscany. In the State Archive of Florence, we were able to find several documents that helped us tracking them. They were also well introduced in society there. On February 17, 1830, Madame and Mademoiselle Barlow were among the foreigners presented at court by the British ministry, that is the Earl of Westmoreland, for whom Maria Barlow had had a letter of introduction before leaving Paris. Also, from local newspapers of the time, we've learned that the Barlows were staying in an apartment in Via della Pergola, a long, narrow street not far from the cathedral. However, they later moved into Casa Cattani, a palace in Piazza Madonna degli Aldobrandini, as noted also by Anne Lister in her journal. Should you go to Florence, this building today is known as Palazzo Benci, and its beautiful facade is still painted in frescoes, and it's right in front of the entrance of the Cappelle Medici. You can't miss it. They chose a good place, I have to say. During this 3 years stay, Maria and Jane Barlow also traveled Italy, visiting Naples, where we found a copy in the archive of their passport, which you can see in the picture here. In this copy, Jane has been recorded with the wrong name, Margherita. It often could happen to be misspelled or misunderstood. And they also traveled to Rome and Lucca again.
And moving on, among Anne Lister Italia-related acquaintances, there is Sophie O Ferrall. Sophie was the young niece of Anne's good friend in Paris, Madame de Bourke. Together with Anne, she traveled all the way from Paris to Copenhagen in 1833. She was a well-educated and fashionable woman with Irish, English, Danish, and Russian origins. She was staying at Madame de Bourke's when she met future husband, Count Federico Confalonieri, who she married in 1841. Not only was Confalonieri 27 years older than her, but also an Italian revolutionist who had played an active role during the 1821 unsuccessful revolt in Milan against the Austrians. On their return from the honeymoon, the newlyweds settled in Palazzo Confalonieri in the historic center of Milan. Countess Confalonieri fully embraced Italian history and culture. For this reason, she gave her contribution to the earlier unification attempts of one Italian territory. Sophie died on November 22nd, 1868 in Blevio, a village near Como, where she had eventually settled. Here you can look at one of Sophie's letters that we found in the National Archives in Copenhagen.
So, last but not least, there's Madame de Bourke. Madame de Bourke was one of Lister's good friends in Paris since the 1830s. Her house was a social place to be in the French capital, so Anne wrote to her and called every time she was in town. Also, Madame de Bourke was Sophie O Ferrall's aunt. Her maiden name was Maria Assunta Leonida Buttini, and she was born in Siena in Tuscany in 1764. When her husband, Count Edmund de Bourke, died in 1821, she settled in Paris. Her apartment in Rue du Faubourg Saint-Honoré, sorry, not French enough, was the center of worldly and political meetings where many Italians found solace and a sort of refuge. Sadly, due to her delicate health, she couldn't return to Siena as she had planned in 1835. However, she never forgot her motherland. In fact, her last will was, and I quote, "After my death, I want a charity establishment to be opened in Siena, my native land in Tuscany, for poor women, unsound or invalid, where they can be looked after." To this purpose, before her death in 1845, Madame de Bourke had left 240,000 francs to the French executors of her will. This charity establishment that was called after her, Pio Asilo Buttini Bourke, which is like Pius Asylum Buttini Bourke, was opened in 1855, no, 1952 and still provides the same sort of personal assistance services. So before we move to the last part of the presentation, I'd like to take the opportunity to say that our researches wouldn't have been possible if Anne Choma would have mentioned Sophie O Ferrall marriage to Confalonieri in her Gentleman Jack book, because that's when that's why we all started our research and why we are still trying to figure out what Sophie did or Madame de Bourke has done during their time in Italy.
And actually, the research about Sophie O Ferrall and the one about Madame de Bourke are tightly intertwined. And last year, Lucia went to Riksarkivet, the Danish National Archive, to investigate.
Yeah. Well, at the Riksarkivet, what we thought would be 5 or 6 interesting records turned into over half a dozen boxes full of documents, and we had to order some more once we were there. So documents, diaries, and loads of letters. We had to create a fast, very fast workflow so I was there and would photograph the documents, upload them in our cloud, and Francesca and Irene would analyze them more accurately from Italy, almost in real time. Thanks to the documents we found, we were able to reconstruct more precisely Sophie's family tree, which you can find on our website. And also, in this massive correspondence between the O Ferrall siblings, guess who peeped up? Miss Lister, of course. The letter we are about to look at was written by Edward O Ferrall to his sister Annie. Both were Sophie's siblings. It took us a couple of months to place Edward O Ferrall and his letter in the right context. And this also meant getting to know him better as a person through the many, many, many letters he wrote.
So, as you know, Anne Lister used to have opinions about nearly everything and surely about anyone she'd met. But how many times have you wondered what those people's opinions were about her and how her presence and their personality impacted them? The letter that we have found in the O Ferrall's correspondence delivers us a description of Anne that sounds like a prophecy and shows the evidence that meeting Anne Lister must have been an extraordinary experience. So Edward O Ferrall, who later became Count de Bourke, was born in 1811, and he was Sophie O Ferrall's brother. At the time of the letter that we are about to show you, he was 22. And as Anne Lister described him in her journal, he was a quick, clever young man. He used to live in Paris at his aunt, Madame de Bourke, where he had moved in 1829, while Annie O Ferrall, Edward and Sophie's younger sister, was living in Saint Croix with their father, brother, and sister Louisa. We have found many letters between Annie O Ferrall and their siblings. The correspondence is quite considerable and shows that how close the O Ferralls were despite the distance. Many of those letters include accounts of their daily routine, chit-chatting and gossip about family and acquaintances. We know from Anne Lister's journals that she and Edward had met for the first time in March 1831, and they met again in August 1834.
So coming to the letter, you can see the letter here on this slide, and in the letter, Edward O Ferrall writes, and I quote, "Miss Lister is really a phenomenon, one of the curiosities of the present day. Our great-grandchildren will certainly have the satisfaction of examining her in detail in some museum. Only think, she wears a man's nightcap, how funny she must look." The first adjective Edward O Ferrall associates with Anne Lister is respectable. For sure, the man-woman that comes after also catches the attention. Without a doubt, this is a strong way to describe her, and the appeal to read it and interpret it with modern eyes is very alluring, but we should not forget that this letter was written in the 1830s. The context of that time was very different. The way he describes Anne tells us so much about what people and men of the time thought a woman should be. We have also been wondering how the cultural context of the time might have influenced Edward's description, how the interests unnurtured, business, science, literature, etc., were considered more typical for a gentleman. Edward O Ferrall's words express the personal point of view of someone who could hardly conceive of a woman being like Anne Lister because she was so extraordinary for 1830 standards. Another very interesting passage that I quoted before of Edward O Ferrall's letter is this one, and I quote it again. Our great-grandchildren will certainly have the satisfaction to examine her in detail in some museum. We could read it in a sort of poetic way and think that what we're doing today is exactly that. We're studying Anne through her words, and we're constantly fascinated by her. But again, we should always remember the context and the time when Edward O Ferrall wrote those words. As Anne herself witnessed firsthand, the 19th century saw an impressive growth of medical science and practice. And at the same time, museums were thriving as a consequence of an era where anthropologists, naturalists, and collectors encouraged their growth. Therefore, although extremely captivating for us today, the expression Edward used could also be read in quite a literal way. So, you know, he could actually mean that he wanted to study Anne in a museum. By now, we have been reading many of Edward's letters, and we feel quite confident in sharing the opinion that he was surely amused by Anne. However, he wasn't mocking her. He knew how to be really sarcastic, and we think this doesn't sound like it. What we'd like to take from this letter is the way in which Anne always manages to surprise everyone, whether it be the 1830s or today.
Wow. Now that's cool. Thank you very much. That's brilliant. And I wonder if there's any people who have put any questions in our chat, and if not so, then I do have some further questions myself as well. But yeah, I do have a question here, and it's actually Lucia. Maybe I can ask you, because you were talking about the Barlows earlier, and one of the questions is, do you know why Mrs. Barlow moved to Italy?
Basically, because it was cheaper living in Italy than in Paris.
Yes, it was definitely cheaper. I remember there's a passage in Anne Lister journals in which Anne Lister says, apparently living in Florence is quite cheap. I think it was in 1833. So I think it was because it was definitely cheap living in Florence. Sorry if I stole your question.
No, please.
No, that's great. That's great. And also people are interested to know who it was that created the Italy travel map on Anne Lister Italia.
The travel map, well, all the Going to Italy project was a really common effort. And basically we worked all together, all three of us, on the travel map. Then there was the Going to Italy project, the day by day, where we made abstracts from the daily entries of the travel journals and posted them on Instagram and then on the website as well. But that's a parallel project. So we published the travel map after.
Obviously, we have used our own transcription for the travel map and Going to Italy, and translation that Lucia did.
Yeah, the travel map is just with the quotes from Anne's journals and their translations in Italian, of course, with no commentary, just every town, what she noted, and every passage.
And how can you tell us a little bit more, maybe in general, how Anne Lister Italia is managed? Who does what?
That's great. Well, Francesca is, well, let's say, is the real hunter, the archive hunter. Although I go to the archives as well, but she's basically a very clever resource for archive hunting. And Irene is working on how to tame us. being a transcriber is so important, knowing what you're talking about. So Irene, I got in touch with her the first time because she was in the West Yorkshire Archive transcription project. So I was pretty sure, and it turned out being like this, that we were all dealing with with a subject we cared a lot about. So we really alternate in doing things, and so there is ideas come up every time from each of us, and we together we work and see how it works better to share the work to realize it.
Yeah. Great. I do have some more questions coming in, so let's get back to the audience there.
Yep.
So one of the questions is, did you have any difficulties finding places because the name at that time was different? Like village names, or is that not?
Lucia, do you remember the time in Milan when we were looking for Porta Orientale?
Oh, yes. Well, the fact is, more than the names, the point is that the places were a bit different from how you got there. So in Milan, we thought Anne was going out of the town from one porta, from one gate, and entering again from the other side, while it was, as a matter of fact, she was doing exactly the other way around. It doesn't make sense to tell it, to say it, and in fact we only realized it when we went there physically and we said, this doesn't work, how we read it, and then we started walking it in the right way, how Anne actually did.
But she used to misspell Italian cities, like when she's in Battaglia Terme in Veneto and she said Battaglia, or in Formazza that she called it Pomalat. I don't recall the exact name, but she adds an M to the name. So
also the fact that some places, especially in the northern part, they were still under the influence of different languages from our Italian, from the modern language especially. So in northwestern Italy, she used mostly the Swiss names. And
she likes to use the French sounding names of places anyway, didn't she? I mean, in other
if I may add one more thing, an anecdote, I think, about naming places with different names. About Milan specifically, things changed quite a lot because what is now the center of Milan was basically under construction, and so lots of the streets actually have a different name. Also because Italy wasn't united yet, so when it was, and then we had a war, so names changed. The thing that we found really helpful in that case was actually finding an 1827 map of that time, so we could, because the layout of the city is the same, so we could follow it through with the actual names that she does write, and then we're like, okay, this street is not called that anymore. And then that helps, of course, navigate the city today as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is what Susanna was talking about in her travel in Paris as well, where Paris has changed quite a bit after Anne visited. Did Anne mention any places in Italy that she wished to go to, but we now know she never managed to?
Naples.
Yeah.
There was the time in 1836 when she always wrote down, me and Anne would like to go to Naples before the end of April. I can forget the particular line, but she did wanted to come to Naples since I live in Naples. But She never managed to arrive here. But Miss Pickford lived here for 3 years, I think it was.
Ah.
I think it was 3 years. She came in 1836 and left in 1838. We have research coming up, right, on passport that we have found in Naples.
Fantastic. Have you got, because that's another question that came up, have you ever evidence of Mariana having ever been to Italy, perchance?
No.
No, that's yet another
Not
thing
so
you
far,
could,
not so
not
far.
so far,
So
quite,
far,
you know,
exactly.
there's so much still to research. And how about connections to the Norcliffes traveling in Italy, because they also did so?
We have found their passport in Naples. That's why we have to work on a article on passports that we have found. Yes, it was 1817, I think, that they came in. Yes, we do have their passport.
And you're mentioning research projects. Is there anything that you can share with us? Maybe possible future project that you're working on? Some stuff that we can look out for?
Well, there's an upcoming update to the Sophie Ferrall's dossier, which is already online, also in English. And we are pursuing the information about Sophie in a parallel way to Madame de Bourke. So maybe that's something that can be.
And since last year, we have worked on Gentleman Jack in the journals, which is like a comparison between what we see in the series and what really happened using Anne Lister's journals. Obviously, we have worked on it with our transcription and on translation. So before season 2 airs in Italy, we would like to do the same for Gentleman Jack in journals too, in the journals.
Yeah. Oh, so there's quite a delay then in showing it on Italian television. Yeah.
If they will, I mean, it's we haven't heard anything about that yet. But,
okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And we were just talking about the Norcliffes and Napoli and traveling. You said that you have evidence of them, and I can see here that Chantal is really interested to know which Norcliffes were traveling together. So if you have any of those details.
I can recall. I can tell you right now because I have.
I'm sure Chantal will get back to you about this. She wants to know.
Okay. Fine.
Another one, which I quite like, a question: how much or at all does Anne talk about food? Because obviously, when we go to Italy, we go there because we love the food. Did she like the food in Italy?
She had a beautiful experience with an ice cream that she mixed it with water, hot water.
Yeah, she seemed
because
to be,
it was too cold.
Oh, it was too cold.
But she tasted the lemon and the chocolate ice cream, but only put warm water in the chocolate one.
Warm water in the chocolate ice cream. Now that's new to me. Yeah. That's not
something she was. This is something very funny. When she was near Mantova, I think she didn't eat it, but she ate them. But she, for the first time, she saw frogs on a stick ready to be eaten. And she mistook them for little birds, you know, without feathers or so, just on the stick ready to be eaten. And then she said they looked too white to be birds. So she got closer and she saw these frogs. And in the same place, she saw for the first time tomatoes on the plant. Just something we are used to give for granted. It's curious for her to hear a person that notices it.
Yeah.
And was also interested in seeing how bread was made and cheese. She went to a cheese factory, I think it was in Lodi and Milan. And again in Milan, she saw how the bread was made, and she made Maria Barlow. So like she woke up early in the morning just to see how the bread was made. In Milan and where? I remember her mentioning twice. Do you remember, Lucia?
Yeah, there was a baker also. She went to see near her hotel. And another anecdote is that when we found the street where her hotel was, now it's completely different, of course, but there was some bakery equipment that welcomed us in a shop window, which was closed, but no sign, no other signs, but with clearly bakery equipment. It was hilarious, but just like at those times.
That's perfect.
In the same street that her hotel stood, the Hotel Falcone, which is no longer there, obviously. But it is. I remember seeing from the map. It is very similar to how it is now, like all the shops, and there were all the shops and the church, the San Siro church. That it was San Siro, right? San Siro church.
Also, she was also in. Was it Padova? She described the second time she went to Padova after Venice. She went once before Venice and then passed again after. They had some what we recognized as what we call bomboloni, some fried kind of like krafen with fresh cream, just ready-made for her. And she was very, very happy about them and enjoyed them.
And she was surprised when the owner brought her a glass of water and come fazzoletto. Sorry.
A little. It was a very clean place for her. So they served her with fresh water, napkin, and full service, and it was cheap for her also.
She hadn't expected that.
Yeah, and she ate pasta, of course, around pasta and parmesan.
Pasta, fantastic. It's interesting how in a subject about Italy we spend this much time. Oh, it's not really it's quite right that we talk about food this much, isn't it, when we talk about Italy? There is, however, another question here that was quite interesting, and I think you can tell us a little bit more about this. Do you think that the results of your searching is contributing to your local history in a way? And I know, says this person, you participated in some events in Italy, which is really cool. Can you tell us a little bit more about those events?
Well, we are now participating to some events that are, Anne Lister is not so known in Italy as in the English-speaking countries, unfortunately, yet. But we've been invited in a couple of occasions to talk about her, and we really want, and it's a part of our mission to explain how her life interests and her acquaintances are connected to the history of our country. Like we have just told you about Sophie O Ferrall. That's the main example maybe I can bring up, because we at school we have learned about Sophie's husband, and we all know by heart that he was married with Teresa Casati. So it's the couple. But then she died, and nothing was said after of what happened after this. So we are just happy to add some things to this story, and also what we're discovering about Madame de Bourke. It was known about her charity establishment, but now we're really making more clear who she was. I mean, she was a rock star in Paris, so we're very proud when we say it.
But do you have any idea why it might be that Sophie O Ferrall isn't known as much as, because is it because she was the second wife, or what would that be?
Because
why?
she was the second wife. Many of their friends and Federico Confalonieri's family didn't support the marriage. but Sophie managed to live in Italy. Maybe she wasn't rich as she expected before the marriage, because Confalonieri wasn't that rich after he had been in prison for like 20 years, because he was a revolutionary. It was against the Austrians, right? The Austrian dominated Italy. You know, as I said, Italy was there was a, okay, va bene. the Lombardo Venetian kingdom. So it was controlled by the Austrians and not the Italians.
Yeah.
Okay, bye-bye.
It's all very, very interesting stuff. So I'm going to sort of, I think, starting to make an end to this session, but I just one more thing, like for future for future research subjects, you mentioned that there's more to be expected about Sophie O Ferrall, correct? And then your updates about the real journals and comparing them to Gentleman Jack too. And I just wanted to give a general shout out again that even and although Anne Lister Italia was officially originally made for Italians to learn more about Anne Lister, there is a great deal of it which is bilingual. You know, there is a English or Italian choice at the top of the screen. So by all means, everybody, if you don't speak Italian, go and visit the website and go and follow everybody that we see here. I believe in the chat there will have been some links dropped to the website and to various other places. And I also think that Lucia, Francesca and Irene are going to share some of the links and other interesting places to visit in a tweet, or what did you say, Lucia? On Facebook, everywhere where you're findable.
Mainly, we are daily, almost daily on Instagram, and then Twitter, Facebook, and the website. You find anything on the website anyway, always. All the time.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure to be here with you today, and I've been really lucky to have been able to be involved with this project. I think you're doing an amazing job. I think it's amazing how you're looking at so many more people around Anne Lister, and finding interest in history that way in your own country and abroad. So brava, bravissima, and everybody, thank you very much for joining us here, and well, have a lovely evening.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Ciao.